Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell. In the news today, violence in the streets of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, after a devastating loss to Germany in the semifinals of the World Cup. Also, hostility along the Gaza Strip escalates as Israel steps up its offensive with deadly bomb attacks against Palestinian militants. And preliminary landmark concussion settlement has been approved to compensate former NFL players. We will have that and a lot more right now on Arise America.
From coast to coast, every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.
Hello, we begin tonight in Brazil, where there is shock and grief over Germany's thrashing of the host nation in the World Cup. For Brazilians, there was hope and expectation that their soccer team would go on to win the whole thing, but in less than a half an hour of play, Germany built an amazing 5-0 lead in the semifinal match. This triggered violence by disappointed fans who vented their anger in the streets. For the latest in this developing story, we turn to Arise News correspondent Lance Santos, who reports from Rio de Janeiro. Also, we'll go in a moment to Arise News correspondent Frank Delapa, who joins us from Copacabana Beach, also in Rio de Janeiro. And Frank, I see you pop up first, so let me talk to you. Can you tell me, you're right there at Copacabana Beach. Have you seen any reaction to this outrageous game that Germany really just humiliated Brazil?
Really, the only reaction we've seen is complete and total shock. This part of Rio de Janeiro is totally quiet. There's helicopters behind me flying over, so I think there is some expectation there could be some trouble. It's been raining on and off basically since kickoff. And so I think that's kept a lid on things. People are just in shock. People are in the streets. They watch the games from bars in the streets, wherever they can. It's a wide open city in that sense. But there's not a lot of unrest. I don't know. They've never seen anything like this, probably not since 1950. And they weren't expecting it now. But there's a history lesson here because in 1950, the country was up for it. They basically thought their team was going to win. And you saw the same sort of pre-game build-up to this one. The president of the country, Dilma Rousseff, in the headlines thinking she's looking forward to maybe winning that the 6th World Cup for Brazil. And Carlos Alberto Pereira, the assistant coach, said that Brazil had one hand on the cup already before it even started. So the optimism was through the roof, which is again, condemned to repeat the history lesson because they did the same thing in 1950, and then people were in total shock then. This reminds me of then in 1950, you saw, we see newsreels of that where people are crying and they just couldn't believe what happened because Brazil was the best team in the world. It was an emerging nation, and it was everything was positive. It was an optimistic country, and it's a little bit like that now too. So they're really it's a state of shock. This happened probably 1998 when they lost to France. There was the same reaction, 3-0 in the final. There was a very strong team, but 7-1. Nobody saw that coming. I don't think anybody saw that coming. But Germany, also, you got to say Germany is a very good team, and we're not underestimated. But this was no contest. That's really never happened to a really, really good team in the World Cup.
Yeah, devastating blow indeed. I'm going to ask you to stand by, Frank. And now I want to turn to our Rise News correspondent, Lance Santos, who has also been covering the World Cup and is in Rio de Janeiro proper and was the first to report for Arise News that there was some disturbance in the street. If we can go to Lance now. Lance, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. We were on the Fan Fest. There's a Fan Fest in Rio de Janeiro, a FIFA Fan Fest. We didn't make it into that one. Sadly, there's a second one behind which shows a screen in the beach. We were watching on that Fan Fest, and when it got to about 4 goals for Germany and 0 for Brazil, we thought, the mood had changed. People were throwing objects at the screen. I said to my friend that we need to leave, we need to get out of here. And as we started to go, another goal went in, and then fireworks started, what we thought were fireworks. And I said that it's odd that they're putting fireworks up for Germany to score 5 goals. And then all of a sudden there were hundreds and hundreds of people running and screaming and shouting that people were shooting behind them. So really disturbing scenes, especially when you saw the fear on people's faces That's something that will stay with me forever. And when you see that there was little families with their mothers, with their parents running, and a lot of people getting trampled as well. Very disturbing scenes on Copacabana Beach.
Yeah, we're looking at some of the video, I believe, of what you're describing right now. Lance, this happened within the last couple of hours. Have you received any word about injuries or even, God forbid, fatalities in this incident?
No, we kept running because we ran outside the Fan Fest when we thought we were safe, and there were very heavily armed police that told us to keep running up a certain street. We ran up that street and we all stopped, and there were hundreds of people who stopped, and then all of a sudden another bang went off and loads of people started running and screaming again. So we ran and we found a British hostel, and we knocked on the door, and they've let us come in. They've locked the gates. So unfortunately we don't have any Wi-Fi. We don't have any knowledge of what's happened. All we can hear, though, is that there are helicopters flying very low overhead, and I think Rio is in for a very long night tonight. There's police sirens going off everywhere, and it's pretty scary scenes here.
Yeah, we see a lot of police lights there, and we saw them also behind Frank Del Appa, who was even at the Copacabana Beach. Well, you stay safe. Thank you so much for the update, and we know
Thanks.
that you'll give us continuing updates as this develops. Lance Santos reporting from Rio de Janeiro, and we also thank Frank Del Appa as well. U.S. President Barack Obama is dealing with a growing illegal immigration crisis. Today, the White House approached Congress with an emergency funding request to help stem the massive influx of minors from Central America. Arise News Washington correspondent Colin Campbell has the latest on this story from our nation's capital. Hey, Colin.
Hi, Debbie. The president is in Texas right now doing some events for the middle class and the economy, also doing some political fundraising, but he won't be visiting the border, which is obviously causing some frustration among Republicans in the House. But like you said before, the president has requested a border control aid package of $3.7 billion. Nearly $4 billion of this aid will be going to trying to quell the situation as tens of thousands of undocumented immigrants have come into the United States and are causing lots of congestion at the border, Debbie.
Colin, what is the president planning to use this money for?
Well, it would be used for myriad things, mainly to support governments in trying to crush the war on drugs, trying to stop the illegal drug trade, also to hiring judges and magistrates, trying to speed up the deportation of some of these undocumented immigrants. It would also be going to aerial surveillance of trying to secure the border and also building detention facilities. Debbie?
Now, Colin, tell me what, the Democratic strategists have said that last week that it would be a PR nightmare for Obama to do a photo op at the border. Are Republicans' suggestion of an appearance by the president with the children a political one?
Yeah, it's really causing a lot of political uproar on the Hill. And let's take a listen to what some lawmakers are saying in reaction to President Obama's request from Congress.
The main thing we have to do is recognize we have an emergency, and Senator Mikulski announced that she was going to have a hearing on that. I believe she said Thursday. And so I think before we start rushing to judgment as to specifics on it, it's something we have to do. It's something we have to do. How we get there, I really don't know at this stage.
Well, if it's a national emergency, which I agree that it is, why is the president raising money for 2 days in Texas and refusing to come to the border and see it for himself? And so he knows what needs to be done. Secretary Johnson knows what needs to be done. But apparently, so far, he's refusing to even request Congress to address that because all he's done is ask for essentially a blank check for $3.7 billion of additional spending.
And just to give you an idea of what a political hot potato this topic is right now, President Obama did not shake the hand of Governor Rick Perry when he went to Texas. But right now, it seems that speaking about immigration and doing anything could be a liability for Democrats. If the president takes a picture at the border and visits the border, Republicans could use that against him in a photo opportunity, saying that because of his lax immigration policies, it's created a crisis at the border. At the same time, using this $4 billion aid package, which would hasten the deportation of thousands of undocumented immigrants, could also be used against him, saying that he's not sensitive to children who are trying to escape poverty and gang violence in their home countries. Either way, it looks like the president is in a very tough spot, but he's trying to ameliorate the situation, according to the White House, as best as they know how at this point.
Colin, let's turn the page. The National Education Association apparently is very upset with the Obama administration, and they are mad at the president, or are they mad, rather, at the president or just the Education Secretary, Arne Duncan? And what's their chief complaint?
Well, right now, a lot of their focus is really focused on, a lot of their anger, rather, is really focused on the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. Even though they may have some grievances with the White House, they're really upset with the way that Duncan is carrying out policies. One of their main grievances with Arne Duncan and possibly the Obama administration is the fact that they are going for what's called teachers' equity. And what this means is they're looking to see which students have access to the best teachers in the country. Their belief, according to the White House, is that a lot of lower income, middle income families don't have access to the best teachers in the country. So what they're doing is they're creating a list, and they're making it a lot harder for teachers to hold on to tenure if they don't live up to the expectations or the teaching standards that they have set. Duncan has really stood behind this principle, and he's looking for better teachers, but not only that, he's trying to eliminate a lot of teachers who have been with the system for a while. Of course, the NEA is the largest teachers union in the country. They're going to back the teachers, and right now they're embroiled in a battle to see which policies are going to stick around.
You mentioned the NEA is the largest teachers union in the country. It's 3 million strong. Are there any other teachers groups that's joining them?
Well, the AFT actually has stood behind a lot of the Obama administration policies. They will not, that is one of the other largest teachers organizations in the country. They will not be joining the NEA and calling for the resignation of Duncan. Just to mention, the NEA is also welcoming a new president, Lily Garcia. She's the president-elect. Duncan has actually congratulated her win, even though she's standing behind a resignation from Duncan, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
And finally, any reaction from the White House to this demand?
Not yet. So far, Duncan has kind of shrugged off the calls for him to step down. And like I said before, he seems to be actually offering an olive branch to the NEA, congratulating Garcia on her win and saying he's looking forward to working with them in the future. But as far as any really political fallout from this, there really hasn't been anything from the White House. Looks like this immigration issue is really going to take precedent right now.
All right, Colin Campbell reporting from Washington, D.C. Thank you, my friend.
All right. See you, Debbie.
The conflict between the Palestinians and Israel grows even more dangerous. Palestinian officials report that Israeli strikes on the Gaza Strip killed several people. Meanwhile, extremists have launched rocket attacks into southern Israel. With tensions escalating, Israel said a ground invasion is possible. This surge in violence along the border is the worst in many years. Earlier, I spoke with the Rise News correspondent Laura Burton, who is in Jerusalem. Seems like this clash just continues to escalate, so I'll start again today as I did yesterday. Laura, what's the latest?
Well, Debbie, actually, it was a real shock earlier. Standing in West Jerusalem at the time, I heard a massive explosion round about at 10 p.m. local time. We saw bright lights in the sky and later found out that actually 6 rockets had been sent from the Qassam brigades, who admitted to sending them to Jerusalem. The majority of them were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system, Israel's prided defense system. But it seems that one actually hit a house in Beit Shemesh, which isn't far from the Israeli Knesset. So we're still waiting to hear if there's any injuries. But actually today, Gaza is really in the news. 17 people have been killed so far. We don't know how many of those are civilians or how many of those are actually militants. The Israeli Defense Forces said they actually hit 50 targets, sending over a barrage of rockets throughout Gaza City in the center of Gaza and also the Rafah crossing. So actually there was a very strange feeling. We were getting reports from Gaza that actually people are so used to having rocket attacks, they were just getting on with their daily lives, still shopping. The streets were full of traffic, and that really juxtaposed actually with the images we were getting of these horrifically blown up bodies from the center. But Sderot, which is just northeast of Gaza, the Israeli city, is a different story. There's been sirens wailing there all day. The majority of people are having to take shelter. The markets have completely closed down. And for them, it's a real sense of deja vu because in November 2012, actually, there were a barrage of rockets also being sent from Gaza. There were a few injuries in Sderot and also Ashdod, nearby the Israeli city. So Hamas have also admitted to sending 60 rockets over to Israel, and sirens are waving all the way from Tel Aviv to the north up to Haifa.
Laura, the Israeli government, as I understand, has urged citizens to stay close to bomb shelters. Are the citizens taking that urging seriously?
In Israel, absolutely, they're taking it seriously. They know through experience that when there's any bomb sirens taking place, they'll close up their markets, the schools are shut, and they will immediately seek bomb shelters. So, as I said, we've been hearing sirens consistently throughout the day. But it seems also that from from Gaza, they're now sending long-range missiles, and they admitted that one has reached as far as Haifa, all the way in the north. So the threat is very much still there. But the place that's the most affected, and there has been 9 injuries so far, is Ashkelon, Ashdod, Beersheba and Sderot, which are the surrounding Israeli cities from Gaza. Hamas admitted that they can take long-range missiles up to 40 kilometers outside of Gaza. So there's a red zone where people are consistently taking shelter, and all schools are closed in those areas.
All right, Laura Borden reporting for us from Jerusalem. Laura, thank you very much. In U.S. news, eager customers in Washington awaited in long lines Tuesday to purchase marijuana for recreational use. Washington is now just the second state to permit the legal purchase of marijuana without a medical prescription. On Monday, state officials issued the first 24 retail licenses, but customers were greeted by shortages and high prices. No pun intended. This is because authorities approved fewer than 100 applications to grow marijuana out of 2,600 applications. Colorado is the other state that legalized recreational use of marijuana. It began selling the drug on January 1st. And a senior U.S. diplomat said Tuesday that Bahrain is undermining reconciliation efforts with its political opponents. On Monday, Bahrain ordered Tom Malinowski to leave the country. The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy angered authorities when he met with a leading Shiite opposition group on Sunday. The group is demanding greater political rights from the Sunni Muslim monarchy. Also in the news, New York City police officers arrested 2 people for operating a drone that came within 800 feet of a police helicopter. They charged the suspects with reckless endangerment. Authorities say the drone repeatedly circled the George Washington Bridge and forced the helicopter to change course to avoid an accident. And a friend of the accused Boston Marathon bomber is on trial for a second day. FBI agent testified Tuesday that he tried to cover up incriminating evidence against the alleged bomber. He's the first of 3 friends charged with interfering with the investigation. And still to come on Arise America, the NFL slated to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to retired players over the next 65 years. Also, truck drivers in California go on strike at 2 of the major supply arteries on the West Coast. And researchers at George Washington University may have discovered how to flip the on-off switch of consciousness in the human brain. We'll tell you about that when we come back.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
In business news, the aluminum company Alcoa reported strong second quarter earnings on Tuesday, unofficially kicking off the earnings season. Arise News U.S. business editor Andrew Schmertz joins us with this story. Hey, Andrew. Okay, so here we go. Earnings season begins with this report. What key companies have reported, and how do the results look so far?
Well, you mentioned Alcoa, and Alcoa is considered in many ways a bellwether. And you say, well, Alcoa, why? Because it's been around so long. It's a steel manufacturer, of course, and that means cars, and that means houses, and that means construction. And Alcoa reporting earnings of better than 50% than what was expected. So that seems to suggest that the companies that Alcoa serves are also doing very well. So we're off to a good start. We'll see how the markets react tomorrow. This was an after the bell report, but that is a pretty good indicator where things may be going. One company, of course.
Okay, so well, more than one company. What are the analysts expecting from the S&P 500 companies, and what's driving their expectations?
Well, S&P is now expecting double-digit earnings growth for many of their companies, and that would be a surprise to the upside. What's driving it is a strong gross domestic product number in the second quarter and evidence that the GDP is getting better in the third quarter. Also, what's driving it is that the economic data across the board shows that manufacturing has increased, that others have increased. So generally, the key sectors that they look at are going up. And so now they've revised a lot of their earnings forecasts. And of course, that sets you up for possible disappointments, but they are sort of encouraged. And they say that generally expectations underperform the reality. And so they're now pretty bullish.
Oh, okay. So, but how high then is the risk of disappointment for investors as well as the stock market?
Well, there's a few areas of possible disappointment. One, that companies miss earnings and don't reach the new lofty expectations, and that could happen. The other concern for investors is quality of earnings. So you're growing. Are you growing top-line revenue, or are you simply continuing to cut costs? We haven't seen top-line revenue grow in the last few years, and that's really key. And the final equation here is margin pressure. When you're talking about margin pressure, you're ultimately talking about labor costs. And our labor costs starting to rise. And if your labor costs are starting to rise and so you're making less money, what do you do then? You raise prices, and then there comes inflation, and then the Fed comes walking in the door and raises interest rates. Some are expecting that the Fed may go a little bit more hawkish and raise interest rates earlier than 2015, but the S&P 500 is not right now. Not the S&P 500, the S&P.
Got it. And I'm detecting that every time you come and talk, you always end up coming back to prices going up and inflation.
Prices are going up, and it's time that we start realizing it. And you can look at the core numbers, but we all know that it's costing more to do business, and we should start expecting to pay more.
Okay.
But we also want to see some wages going up.
At least finally, we're not talking about the bad weather anymore.
It depends unless you consider 100-degree temperatures outside bad weather.
Well, there's that.
And that'll be a new excuse. It was too hot to go shopping.
Exactly. All right, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie.
We'll see you. As we reported last night, a federal judge granted preliminary approval of a settlement between the National Football League and 4,500 former players. The lawsuit is over the league's financial responsibility to help cover the cost of treating players who suffered concussions on the football field. This decision comes 2 weeks after the NFL agreed to remove its $675 million ceiling on payments. Meanwhile, the NCAA, which governs college sports, issued a series of guidelines on Monday related to concussion safety. Head injuries in football, of course, has become an issue at every level of the sport. Well, Fred Smoot is a former Washington Redskin cornerback and players advocate, and he joins us by phone from Jackson, Mississippi. Fred, welcome to Arise America. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
If I understand it correctly, you were a part of these 4,800 or so former players that were a part of this class action lawsuit. So what's your reaction to this decision preliminarily to move forward, which could lead to settlements for all players?
Well, that's the mission. When everything was brought together, I think the one thing we had in mind was making sure every player was taken care of, but not overly paid for anything, anybody getting an extra check. It's more of the thing that, we're the guys that's going to feel the repercussions of this. And everybody says, well, you played football, you know what you was getting into before you did it. Well, also, I just equated and I compared to the Surgeon General. what he says on a pack of cigarettes. He lets you know beforehand that cases of cancer comes from smoking cigarettes. Well, we didn't have that. We didn't have a Surgeon General warning about concussions. And when you say injury, concussion was not looked at as an injury. And that's what I try to, tell people. It was one of those things where we played through that. It was called just getting a ding. You shook your head. You'll be all right. We do that. That's normal. It was part of the game. Yes, it was. So that's the thing that I think that comes from this. I don't want anybody to take it for granted like the players are in it for the money. I just personally want everybody to be taken care of, especially when it comes to, brain damage and things of that type.
As I understand it, a part of this preliminary settlement says that all former NFL players, retired players, could be eligible for the benefits if they're able to prove it. It would also cover legal costs, so the attorneys get a little bit from this. And also that in this settlement, the NFL does not admit any guilt. How do you feel about that?
That's one of them things. I think when you look at it from a business standpoint, I think they have to move on that way, and we have to move on that way because the guys are part of this lawsuit are also guys that are still part of the NFL family. It's one of the largest, longest-running fraternities that you can, you want to be a part of. So I just think it's a thing where they had to state it that way. But, we know what's coming from this, and we know why I was here. And it just was a thing, and when I look back at it, it just, identifying the problem and taking care of it. And it didn't happen at a timely fashion. So hopefully the future players benefit from this one stance.
Indeed. Fred, I'm going to ask you to stand by. I want to add to this conversation Brian Gilmore, who is a veteran professional football player, and he joins us from Fort Worth, Texas. Brian, it's good to see you. Thanks for being with us. You had the opportunity to be a part of this class action suit and decided not to be. Tell me why not, and then after you do that, tell me what you think about this preliminary decision.
Well, to be quite honest with you, my decision came from a bout with the NFL, from the NFL disabilities claim. It basically was, if you got a good lawyer and you were able to go to your own doctors and get qualified through them, then you just submit your paperwork to the NFL and you kind of go through the whole little process. And I just got tired of lawyers scamming players. That's pretty much what we went through as players, lawyers making a lot of money off of us, and we're really not benefiting from the programs that the NFL had in place for us.
I don't know how much detail you know about this preliminary settlement, but there are a couple of former players, Alan Faneka, if I'm saying that correctly, and Sean Morey. They've already filed an objection to this revised settlement. I won't read all of it, but they say among some things that it excludes some classes of players, that the negotiations were not done at arm's length, and that the notification documents are false and misleading. Are you worried that even though this settlement has been approved to move forward, that it will be so cumbersome that those that really need the benefit of it might not actually get it?
That's the whole point, and that's my whole stance. I mean, this is really a joke. All this is just goodwill coverage for the, through the media for the NFL. With the season coming up, they're just trying to generate some, good public interest in the product. But to be quite honest with you, it is a very labor-intensive, it is a humiliating process, and it's very demeaning as a former athlete to have to go through some of these tests that the NFL puts you through, and then at the end of the day tell you, hey, you didn't qualify, by the way. We do recognize that you had significant injuries, but we're not going to pay you or compensate you for the injuries that you sustained while playing for our league.
Fred, let me bring you back in this, and I really just have a few seconds left, but what do you think the NFL should do going forward to prevent this type of situation ever again?
Well, what I tell people, we're in a more, what I would call law-conscious era, where everybody wants to look for any type of lawsuits and stuff like that. I think this opened the eyes of the NFL and understand if they know any information that the players might need to know going into the future, that they might need to get it out now. If they want to proceed in a good manner, because a lot of these kids they begin to stop playing football. Their parents are not letting them play football because of stuff like this, and they understand the future of the NFL are the young kids. So they understand the ramifications of this. I think they're understanding this now. If they can only come to the right agreement to make sure that everybody before this era was taken care of, I think we can move forward in a good manner. And it just comes down to business. It comes down to numbers. And I think that's what it comes down to. So if we can find the right number, I think everything can proceed in a great way.
Fred Smoot, Brian Gilmer, thank you both, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Moving on to another story. In California, scores of truck drivers began a strike against 3 trucking companies. They're demanding improved working and wage conditions. The truckers are in a long-standing dispute with the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach companies. According to the striking drivers, the companies have prevented them from unionizing and improperly classifying them as contractors in order to reduce their wages and benefits. The companies dispute those charges. They say that the disgruntled picketers do not represent the majority of the drivers. Well, Barbara Maynard is a spokeswoman for Justice for Port Truck Drivers, and she joins us from California. Thank you so much for being here with us, Barbara.
Thank you for having me on.
I do appreciate it. First of all, can you just give me a little bit of a summary of the conditions under which these striking truck drivers have been working, that they're protesting now?
Well, you know, you really can look at this as sweatshop on wheels. Most of us in America think about sweatshops as being overseas, and excuse me. And here in the United States, we really do have some of the worst sweatshops that anybody could ever imagine. Many of these truck drivers are actually having to pay to work. They're having negative paychecks at the end of a week after working 40, 50, 60, 70 hours because they're basically paying the employer's expenses because then it's classified as independent contractors. It's tough work to begin with, but when you're barely even getting paid to do the job, it just doesn't make sense. So they've been fighting back, and they have been fighting back hard, and they've been filing wage and hour claims with the California Department of Labor, and they're winning in every instance, and there's more to come. They have been fighting back because the boss has been retaliating against them for wanting to form a union and for filing these claims. And the retaliation is some of the absolute harshest retaliation that you could ever imagine. We're talking about people getting fired, death threats, harassment, physical bullying. It's terrible, and there have been many, many charges filed against these companies for unfair labor practices. And that's why they're on strike. They're on strike because they just want the opportunity that every American should have to form a union in their workplace and the opportunity to be classified as an employee when that's exactly what they are.
Barbara, I want you to stand by for just 1 second. I'm going to jump in because we now have Alex Paz, who is a former driver with one of the 3 firms affected by the strike, and he's joining us also from Long Beach, California. Alex, Barbara has been doing a good job of describing the conditions under which you've been working. I'm just wondering, how have you been treated and those around you by the company during your efforts to try to organize and get better rights and benefits?
Oh, well, just the retaliation is really harsh. And as, for example, at TTSI, for example, like once we started getting together and started fighting back and fighting these retaliation claims, they just started intimidating us. They started intimidating us by just not giving us word or really telling us that we don't know what we're doing and stuff like that. And then finally, once we have the DLSC claims, the company went ahead and fired me. When I had a hearing on May 20th, I testified before the labor commissioner, and next thing you know, the boss was present at the hearing, and 2 days later, he fired me.
Barbara, let me ask you this. There are, as I understand it, 120 workers that are striking. However, these 3 companies have 15,000 truckers. So what kind of impact do you expect this strike to really have?
So just a slight correction there. There are about 15 or 16,000 truckers serving the ports of Los Angeles, but these 3 companies only have a couple hundred drivers. So this is a very fractured industry. There's no big players. We don't have a Walmart of the drayage world, as they call it. And so there's really a tremendous impact. You wouldn't believe, if you were down here, you just wouldn't believe the impact that guys like Alex and others are making out there on the picket line, because what they're doing is they're picketing the trucks themselves. They're not picketing the terminals. So when a truck from Alex's company, TTSI or Green Fleet Systems or PAC-9 pulls up, the picket line goes in front of that truck and commerce stops. Now that's power, if you ask me. Some of the photos I've seen from the picket lines today, where you've got 2, 3, or 4 people standing in front of a truck, and it basically shuts the terminal down.
It's important.
Tremendous power.
Indeed. It's important to note that we did receive a short statement from the California Trucking Association from Sean Yaden, the CEO. I believe that's how you pronounce Sean's last name. Says, while the California Trucking Association respects individuals' rights to peacefully exercise free speech, the timing of this labor disruption is highly irresponsible. Before I have to go, Alex, let me just ask you, how far are you willing to take this strike? How long are you willing to stay off the job to get better conditions?
Oh, as long as it takes. It's going to take, it won't be out there as long as it takes to get to, so the companies could get the message fine, like let them know that we're not going to take it no more. So as long as it takes, we're going to stand out there and we're going to fight. We're going to fight for our rights, and as long as it takes. So it looks like if the company depends, it's up to the company. They could end it. They could end it real quickly. They just have to, just accept the fact that they are breaking the law and sit down with us and negotiate. All right, we'll go as long as it takes.
Alex Paz, Barbara Maynard, thank you both.
Thank you.
And still to come on Arise America, we'll take a closer look at Afghanistan's 13-year experiment with democracy in light of the country's recent election crisis.
One of the great things about Arise News, it is truly a multicultural global channel that is paying attention to communities of all different kinds, not just here in the United States, not just in Africa, but all around the world, as we're giving a voice to the people that don't traditionally have the kind of a voice that a mass media organization can have. You're getting here at Arise News that you're not going to find at the other networks is a unique perspective, and I think that's part of what Arise is here to do.
Turmoil over the presidential runoff election continues in Afghanistan. A defiant Abdullah declared himself the winner. This comes one day after election officials declared that his opponent, Ashraf Ghani, was leading in preliminary results. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry warned against a power grab in attempts to create a parallel government. Meanwhile, a suicide bomber killed 16 people in Afghanistan's mountainous region. This comes as the security situation deteriorates and NATO troops prepare to leave the country. To help us sort out some of the issues arising from this election crisis in Afghanistan, I spoke to Michael Kugelman from the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Michael, of course, Abdullah does not accept the results of this election, and it's understandable considering he was far ahead of Ashraf Ghani in the first election and now lags pretty far behind in this runoff. Abdullah's claims that there is voter fraud. What are your thoughts about that? Does it seem likely to you?
Yes, it does, unfortunately. I would definitely say there was voter fraud, and really two specific reasons. One is that we're told in these preliminary results that there were 8 million people that voted. That's a large number. It would be at least 1 million more people than voted in the first round of elections. And yet eyewitnesses who were observing the vote during the second round of voting all consistently across the board were saying that turnout was much lower the second time around. People were talking about empty polling stations, no lines at all anywhere, and yet now we're hearing that at least 1 million more people voted in this second round. That's the first thing. The second reason why I think there is voter fraud is that if you look at the actual results, if you look at the numbers, they just don't add up. If you look at some of the provinces, voting in some provinces, in some cases, you see that the number of voters, the number of votes actually exceeded the number of eligible voters. So to me, that is that signifies fraud. I would not say that there was fraud on a mass level that Abdullah has suggested. I would not say that. I wouldn't believe all of his allegations. I mean, for example, he had said that he had an audio recording of the head of Afghanistan's election commission saying that he was going to help Ghani win the election. That's never been proven. That seems a bit hard to believe. But I would say that, unfortunately, there has indeed been fraud in this second round of voting.
The Election Commission says that they won't declare a winner until about 1 million ballots are completed in the auditing process. But I guess my question is, what assurance is there that the auditing process is clean?
Well, yeah, this is another problem. I mean, the good news is that over the last few years, and certainly since the last election in Afghanistan in 2009, there have been a lot of efforts by the international community to put a lot of money into making the election process, the electoral process in Afghanistan more efficient, more effective, and more clean, more transparent. So I think we have reason to believe that this recount, this audit, whatever you want to call it, will be relatively successful to the extent that it actually happens.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, while on a visit to Tokyo, to Japan, said that if any power was seized illegally in Afghanistan, that would lead to an end to U.S. financial support as well as security support. How substantial would interrupting that support be for Afghanistan? And can you give us any details about how much the U.S. does support Afghanistan in these ways?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, Afghanistan is one of the largest recipients of U.S. foreign assistance. And really, given how much money flows into Afghanistan from the U.S. government, Afghanistan would effectively lose a lifeline. I mean, that's essentially what this assistance to Afghanistan has been. So this is a very big threat from John Kerry. That said, I don't think it's a threat that the U.S. government would have to follow up on. I don't think that things would get to the point in Afghanistan where you would have a situation where someone would try to overthrow the government or something like that. But it's a very big threat, a very dangerous one that has never been made before. And I think the Afghans know that. And in fact, Abdullah, who was earlier in the week saying that he was threatening to launch his own government, a shadow government, he's been backing down from that ever since Kerry made his threat.
And speaking of Secretary of State Kerry, he's supposed to visit on Friday. Do you think that this will make a substantive change in the atmosphere there?
Yes, I do think that it'll change the atmosphere. It certainly will not end the election crisis. Kerry's not going to go and come away with an outcome that everyone's happy with. But Kerry, I think, will help temperatures lower. I think he'll get both sides, the Abdullah side and the Ghani side, talking to each other. And Kerry has a good track record here. He's always been seen by the Obama administration as someone to send to this region, Afghanistan and also Pakistan, when there's a crisis that needs to be diffused. Kerry has always been this person. It goes back to his days as a senator. And I think for that reason, there's reason to be optimistic that when he goes to Afghanistan, it's not just going to be like you have a Secretary of State trying to mediate problems. It's going to be someone that has a proven record as someone that could get these sides to sit down and talk to each other and at least make the environment a bit more civil and a bit less tense.
Michael Kugelman, thank you so much for your expertise. It's always good to talk to you. And still to come on Arise America, in South Africa, the defense teams rests in the trial of the Paralympian sprinter Oscar Pistorius for the murder of his girlfriend. We'll have a report from Johannesburg. And you are watching Arise America.
News can definitely be improved when reflecting diversity.
A lot of mainstream news, they don't dive into it.
Who wants to hear about negativity all the time?
They only show what they think people want to know and not what people really should know.
World-based stories, that's what I enjoy the most.
I think diversity of news is important to the world so that everybody will be aware of their surroundings and what is happening today.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Researchers delving deep inside the human mind may have found a switch that can literally turn off consciousness. It's the first time that scientists have been able to flick consciousness off and on by stimulating a single area of the brain. Dr. Mohamed Kubaisi is the lead author of the study and associate professor of neurology at the George Washington School of Medicine and Health Sciences, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Arise America, Dr. Kubaisi.
Thank you, Debbie.
I think that science is probably struggling with this, but in a simple way that we all can understand. First of all, can you just describe what consciousness is and why it might be important for researchers, scientists to know where it is in the brain?
Conscious awareness refers to the ability of human beings to basically be what they are, to respond, to recall, to process all the sensory input and perceive the moment as it is, as a single experience. So, for example, when we see a color and we hear a sound and we associate them as a single experience, that's one of the functions of conscious awareness. We know that consciousness is processed in the brain by very widely distributed networks in the cortex, which is the outer layer of the brain, as well as in the brainstem. But we have not so far identified a single region whose electrical stimulation or interruption can interfere with the consciousness processing throughout the brain. And this finding is the first of its kind to identify a region whose apparently robust connectiveness or connectivity with the distributed consciousness networks has led to its being a control switch. The importance is crucial as regards the potential therapeutic implications because there are many disorders that involve alteration of consciousness, including epilepsy and obviously coma.
Yeah, well, you've taken the next question right out of my mouth. Of course, you discovered this region when you were looking for the origin of seizures for an epileptic patient, and then found when you stimulated this particular region. I'm going to let you say the name, and I'm not going to try to say it. When you stimulated it, then she stopped responding to all stimuli, and then you could stop stimulating and she would come back to consciousness. So if this is the spot where the switch for consciousness lies, then what are the implications here? Does this mean that people in comas, if you stimulate this part of the brain, that you could wake them up?
This is a possibility. We hope this is true, and we hope it will be tried, especially individuals who have chronic, persistent vegetative states and comas. What you need to do in such individuals is to lead or override or activate the whole network. Think of it as a, intricate electrical network that is difficult to activate at different sites. But if you identify a spot that is well connected to every single area of this network and you can trigger an electrical stimulation there, you may be able to push life into it again. So comatose patients may hopefully benefit from electrical stimulation of that region.
Tell me a little bit about this region of the brain, and do say that name.
Well, it's called the claustrum.
There.
The electrode where we stimulated and induced the disruption of consciousness was very close to the claustrum. The claustrum is a brain region that has been known to scientists for hundreds of years, but there is no known role for it. There have been hypotheses suggesting that the role of the claustrum may be in binding sensory experience together and in processing consciousness. And these hypotheses were actually made based on the fact that anatomically the claustrum is very well connected with every single area of the brain, including the areas that process emotions and memory and vision and hearing and everything else.
Dr. Kubasi, let me jump in there because I want to get to this before we run out of time, and we're about to do that. So what's the next step? Where do you go with this bit of discovery?
So we're doing two things. At the clinical level, this discovery will hopefully inform a lot of our clinical interventions and clinical research. If we happen to have electrodes in the same spot, we will do detailed testing in order to further characterize the function of this area and assess the potential therapeutic implications. In animals, I have an animal lab at GW, and we are implanting electrodes in that region, stimulating them electrically and testing whether the electrical stimulation can have therapeutic effects on epilepsy and on the progression of seizures.
Sounds extraordinarily exciting. Do keep us posted on this. Congratulations on this discovery, Dr. Mohamed Kubasi. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We turn now to another story. The Oscar Pistorius trial continued on Tuesday. The South African Olympian is on trial for fatally shooting his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp, on Valentine's Day last year. The defense rested today, and now many are eagerly awaiting closing arguments. Earlier, I spoke with the Rise News correspondent, Nastasia Tay, who is in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we know now, Nastasia, that the defense has finished their case. Now they go to closing statements. Can you tell us what the process is from here then?
Well, Debbie, we've got some time to wait still. We finally finished with all of the evidence presented today. It's been 39 days, 39 court days since the beginning of the trial, which actually started all the way back at the beginning of March. We'll now adjourn for literally about a month. And within that period of time, in the next 3 weeks, the state will put together their written arguments. So they'll be submitted on the 30th of July. Then they'll be handed to both the judge and the defense. The defense will have the state's arguments to work from when they put together theirs. They submit theirs on the 4th of August, and then both sides come back to court on the 7th of August, on 7th and 8th of August, both to do oral arguments, so presenting essentially a summary of what they've written down in their written arguments. Those are expected to be fairly hefty documents, which the judge will have to go through in great detail. After that, we'll then break for possibly up to a week, possibly more. I do know that Judge Thokozile Masipa wants a very, very quick resolution to this case, so it could be as short as a period of few days before she then delivers her verdict.
Let me just ask you this, Nastasia, and it might be unfair for you to compare the two systems, but in the U.S. with the jury trial, the closing statements can often be very critical for the jury because it's the last impression that they have of the defense and the prosecution's case. How much weight do these statements carry when the judge is deciding?
Judge Thokozile Masipa is assisted by 2 assessors, so you'll have seen them sitting on either side of her. They do help her write the judgment. So she'll be putting down not only an oral judgment in court, but also quite a fat written judgment. She'll be referring to both the written arguments, which both sides will hand in, as well as their oral arguments. Now, the oral arguments are really just a summary of what they've written down. It's an opportunity for them to, with whatever kind of rhetorical flourishes, describe to the judge exactly what they want to get across. It is important because it's an opportunity for them to really communicate with the judge, but ultimately she's going to be having to refer to these really hefty other written documents as well. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of coverage of this case here and abroad. Everyone wants to make sure they're getting it absolutely right. So you can be sure that the judge is going to be very, very thorough indeed.
Of course, we were waiting yesterday to see whether or not the defense would close their case. They first said after Professor Derman was released that they might look into having other witnesses testify. Ultimately, no more did. What can you tell us about these witnesses that declined to testify for the defense?
We've had a total of 37 witnesses throughout the trial so far. That's both for the states and for the defense. Now, very interestingly, Advocate Barry Rue, who's the defense attorney for Oscar Pistorius, stood up in court today and insinuated that various different witnesses that they had approached had declined to testify on the basis of not wanting to be in the media spotlight. Now, this trial is the first trial to be broadcast, particularly broadcast live, ever in South African history. There's been a huge amount of interest here. There is a standing court order that does allow for various witnesses to say that they don't want their faces shown on television, but however, their voices are broadcast. So there's always a live audio broadcast of what's going on in court. Apparently, several people didn't want to have even their voices heard because it's been such a public trial. Now, it's a really interesting point because it's been raised now by the defense. He said he wanted it put on the record. And several different legal experts that I've spoken to have said that it may actually be grounds for appeal if it has actually affected how evidence has been laid out.
Very, very briefly, Nastasia, when this trial started many, many weeks ago, public sentiment in South Africa was equally divided, about 50%. Those who thought Oscar Pistorius was guilty of murder, those who thought that he really did commit make a mistake. Has that sentiment changed now that we're at the end of the trial?
I think it's really seesawed up and down, even with the same witness on the stand, whether or not they were giving their evidence in chief or being cross-examined, you really saw public sentiment changing quite dramatically. I do think that it's still divided here. However, there's been less talk, you'll notice, from the prosecution actually in court around whether or not he actually intended to shoot Reeva Steenkamp. I think what it's really come down to now is this line between murder and culpable homicide. Culpable homicide here is very similar to manslaughter in the United States. And really it's going to come down to what the judge thinks was going on in his head when he fired those shots, which is why his state of mind has been so crucial throughout the trial. I think what we're looking at now is possibly a murder charge, which carries a mandatory 15-year prison sentence, or if the defense has been successful in arguing that because of his disability and his vulnerability and his immediate reaction to these noises that he heard and his deep-seated fears about crime, that it was perhaps a reasonable mistake to make, that he may get culpable homicide. I think that's where we're sitting now. It doesn't feel like premeditated murder of Rivers Steenkamp is even on the table in legal terms anymore.
It'll be very, very interesting to see. We'll leave it right there for now. Nastasia Tay reporting for us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you, Nastasia. On a much lighter note, a new autobiography offers insight into the life of a multidimensional giant in the hip-hop world, Ja Rule. Arise News book editor Marva Allen is here to tell us all about it. Hey, Marva.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Wonderful, terrific.
Well, I like the title of this book, Ja Rule, Unruly.
Unruly, which is just about his life, right? In so many ways. You know, this is a book I think that he wrote when he was incarcerated, as you know, in 2011. He was incarcerated for tax evasion and owning a gun, you know, and so on. And he was caught by a group of policemen who were specially formed to watch hip-hop artists. Anyway, when he was in jail, one guy said to him, you know, your children are going to be job security for my children. And this really made him want to change his life and so on. So he spent his 2 years, he came out and decided that he was going to do all the right things. And so at the end of the book, he is with his wife, he has watching his children, and his youngest child is going to Hampton University. Okay. So a good story. 30 million records sold, so he's going to do it again.
The moral to that story is if you have to go to jail, write a book while you're there. And my executive producer told me in my ear, and this tells you how old and out of it I am, it should be Ja Rule.
Ja Rule, yes, exactly, Ja Rule.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Now, this guy, I can't pronounce his name correctly. Michael Jordan, The Life.
Michael Jordan, The Life. Do we need another book on Michael Jordan?
Oh, my goodness.
The answer is actually yes. This is a book that goes back since 1890, and we meet all his family members before. And his grandfather was named Dawson Hands, which what's in the name, right? And he loved him very much. And he was a guy, you know how he used to put out his tongue when he was focused?
Yes.
That's what his grandfather did, and his own father. So this book talks about, you know, the rise of Jordan and how important his family was, how important basketball was, how he had a drive-by wedding to Juanita in Las Vegas, and all the way through to his speech in 2009 when he was inducted, and to his new wife.
Well, here's my question here. Okay, so maybe when you get to the new wife, I was going to say, is there any new information in here? Because I feel like, you know, everything's been said and written.
You know, sort of everything has been said and written about it, but going back so far and sort of showing why this propensity and why this genius happened, and they even suggested that he might have been bipolar.
All right. So let's get to the last one.
Yes.
Updike.
Updike, John Updike, the American writer. John Updike has won just about every literary award in the world. This is a biography about him written by a journalist, Adam Begley. And what he does, he's a very private person, yet he tells us all about his life in books. And of course, you know, he's written the amazing Rabbit Riches and all the trilogy, or I think it's actually more than that. I think it's 5 books in the series. And in '83, he was the writer in the world, you know, very, very recognized. And he wrote from a simple middle class perspective. So he is the guy that kept America's middle class alive in his writing, and he ended up going to Harvard, and Harvard, after he died in 2009, just bought all his works for $3 million. So, yes, so it's really nice. So it's just a very nice story about a very, very important literary figure.
Indeed. I'm sure that you can get some insights that are very fascinating.
Absolutely. It's a densely written book, you know, but you can absolutely find out about this amazing man.
All right, Marva Allen, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for joining us. That's going to do it. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.